Appreciate everybody taking the time to join us for this webinar on password management. We do have Anthony Minnie, our president and CISO of Pearl Technology. And then we have Michael Crandell, who is the CEO of Bitwarden, one of our largest vendors and partners that we have here as well. So I'll hand it over to the two of you and hope everybody enjoys the webinar.
All right. Thank you, Nick. And thank you to everyone who joined. We have a pretty exciting topic today, one that I don't think gets enough attention, and it's also changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. So we're looking forward to diving into that. And if you have questions, I think the Q&A is being monitored. If you want to throw them in there or raise your hand, by all means, ask questions and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to kick off. We'll look at our agenda. We're going to talk through some password challenges, some risks associated with those challenges. We'll get into password management and then some best practices for rolling out. And then we have Michael to give us some Bitwarden updates, and then again, a Q&A at the end. To introduce myself, I kind of have this funny AI picture, but I'm dual-hatted. I've been in the federal system for 25 years, working in the DoD, specifically in the Air Force. I've deployed in combat operations. I've also been activated by our governor in Illinois for election cybersecurity support. And then I've been in the civilian sector as well. I'm the president at Pearl Technology, also our chief information security officer. But I've also been dual-hatted between operations and security. So I can empathize with the user and the operators in trying to manage administrative systems, and then also empathize with security when we don't do our due diligence from a security standpoint and we're dealing with the after effects of a ransomware attack. Both are challenging. And I bring up that shameless plug just to let you know that this QR code is legit. I put my credentials on it. I tell you not to click on links. However, tiny URLs are just as dangerous. So if you could pull out your phone and click on the link. Jennifer just threw it in the chat. If you're a little scared of that QR code, you can click the link, which is Pearl Technology LLC 938. It'll take you to this poll. We'd like to see, and I'm going to share my screen here, what your challenges are. So I'm putting it in presentation mode. If you could click on that. How do you manage passwords today? And this could be you individually, or if you're representing an organization, you can give us your best shot on kind of what you're doing in your company. All right, I'll give it about 20 more seconds. If you're having any difficulties, throw it in chat. Jennifer's monitoring the chat. If you could let me know anyone's having issues. All right. Looks like it's kind of settling down. So one thing that's been interesting to me in this password management conversation is I feel, and Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the password manager was really popular in the consumer space, and there wasn't a lot of enterprises using it. So we're at this kind of crossroad where our enterprises are using a lot more SaaS and cloud-based systems, that the password managers definitely become a more focused topic. So I have a picture here, and on the left side, I pull up my network administrator in me, where we used to manage everyone's access pretty much on the servers inside our building or inside our enterprise. And you had that one password, you're probably changing it every quarter, and you might have added maybe a pound sign or a dollar sign to the end of it, and you just kept rolling with a similar password. And in the last 5 years, we've noticed that as corporations and people move to cloud-based systems, not everything can be tied to your Microsoft login or your single sign-on. So you're having to remember a lot more passwords to get into your ERP, or your different HR systems, for example. And another component in migration that's happened at the same time is you're having a lot more IoT devices getting on your network, whether that's a smart car, camera system, a Roku box, or machinery. And some of these things also can't connect to your single sign-on. So you're logging into a lot more devices on your network with passwords, and you're also logging into a lot more websites. So this evolution has exploded the need for password management. And the solution is really coming out of the consumer space. Most of the people I talk to are comfortable in using a password manager on their phone and their personal life. And a lot of them just unfortunately are not using it in their enterprise or at their company. So that's kind of where we're at today. On average, an employee has about 70 to 100 passwords. I feel like that's even maybe low, but that's a lot to remember. And then the complexity requirements are getting even more difficult. I know that sometimes they require 13 to 27 characters, and doing that manually is incredibly frustrating. There's enough memes on this one that we could probably have a couple hours of laugh, but it is a challenge, and that does get people to feel overwhelmed. And when they're overwhelmed generating a password, they're going to stick to what they know works, and that can limit kind of the complexity of what passwords they're using. So they're going to start reusing their passwords. Another dynamic here that we see is that a lot of the software subscriptions a company's paying for is no longer going through the IT department. So just like we looked at that visual earlier where all the servers and everything you were logging into was hosted within your organization's four walls, now that people can log into a website, they can, I mean, some things don't even require a paid subscription, but people within your organization now log on to websites, and we call this shadow IT. It's kind of got a dirty name, but it really is just software that's hidden in the dark that our IT department or your company is just unaware of. And I can say personally, in the last 3 to 4 months, we've seen a growth in shadow IT, specifically around AI products. A lot of people are getting a lot of productivity tools from AI, and they're logging into systems, and no one really knows about it. So that is definitely a concern, especially when 65% of the websites people are logging into are considered shadow IT because the IT department is just not familiar. So this is all part of that explosion. Some of the practices that are putting your company at risk is, again, we talked about how people feel overwhelmed, so they are reusing passwords. I'm going to go through this slide, and I'm going to raise my hand that I have been guilty of all of these in my career. I know as a network administrator, I think I had about 120 passwords before the password manager days, Michael. Like, I had to remember these. I had to come up with a system in my head. And even though they were a little bit different, enough of them were close enough. So people, 95% of passwords are reused or duplicated. 44% of passwords across personal and work. And I think that this evolution came from, having strong passwords at work, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna log into Netflix. I might as well use that same password I'm using at work, because then I won't forget it, and I know it's a complex one. So a lot of people will bleed over their work passwords into their civilian and personal life. So 44% of people are reusing those from work into their personal life. In just the first half of 2025, we saw a report that 1.8 billion accounts were exposed. And that's essentially, things you're logging into, whether you created a Nordic Track subscription or registered your Ninja coffee maker, whatever passwords you put in there, if that organization got breached, it is now exposed. So as we just mentioned, if people are reusing passwords in their personal life with your work passwords, now those passwords are out there and they can be used to launch an attack. We also see, the common passwords. You wouldn't think this is a thing in 2025, but it is. People are using minimum easy passwords when they can get away with it. And unfortunately, a lot of the IoT or industrial control systems don't have strong authentication controls. So we're seeing some of these systems, whether it's even a water control system or a surveillance camera system, not requiring strong passwords. And people will kind of go with what they think is easy to remember. And we're seeing a lot of really common passwords still being used for those. And then another kind of infamous hidden secret is people sharing credentials. Sometimes within work, we have systems or accounts that we're logging into with maybe a generic username, like a system username, and we're sharing that access with the coworker. And people are sharing those passwords either in email, text message, or a Word document on the network. We kind of saw that with the poll. A couple of people admitted it. Again, network admin, cyber operations officer, and air source, I've done it. Not recently. It was probably 20 years ago, but I've done a lot of these things in a pinch, and it wasn't putting our nation's security at compromise. I promise you that. But, maybe it was a Roku box or something like that. So it happens. And it's happening every day, and it's happening in places we just aren't seeing, because keeping systems secure is inconvenient for most users. It just is. And then the problem there is there's no real visibility. If we go back to the slide where I showed the transition from the servers to the cloud systems, once the cloud became prominent, a lot of us network administrators lost access to the visibility of our passwords. We could see who had weak passwords, we could make them reset, but now we don't even know. So we don't know if people are using or reusing their passwords without a password manager, which has definitely put us at significant risk. So what happens when you ignore these problems is 38% of breaches involve stolen passwords. It's an absolute gold mine. As soon as a notification hits the news that there's been a breach, immediately, especially with AI tools and automation, people are going out there, they're grabbing these credentials, and they're immediately trying to use them in what we call a brute force attack, where they're trying to take as many hits at all your logins as possible. 47% of the SMBs have experienced a password related breach. And a lot of organizations suffer from orphaned accounts after offboarding. And what that is when someone maybe leaves your company or is terminated and you don't know all the accounts that they're logging into because of that shadow IT we talked about, those accounts then become orphaned and dormant and you're just not aware. So the access could still be available. You're not even aware that that person was logging into those websites. And it does impact your compliance, whether it's NIST 853 or the NIST cybersecurity framework. It could impact your insurance. I've seen a lot of insurance questionnaires where, people think they're managing passwords just because they're maybe managing your email password. But this includes everything from your ERP to your HR. If you cannot say without a shadow of a doubt that you have control of the passwords for your business systems, your crown jewels, your personally identifiable information, then you really don't have the right to answer that question saying it's in control. So it can impact a lot of security compliance. So we have the next poll based on the challenges and everything we just went through. If you could, I had to hit present, log back in to the URL Jennifer gave us, or the QR, and ask us what is your biggest challenge, whether again that's your personal challenge or what you feel your company's biggest challenge is. Probably should have had an all of the above. I apologize. All right, I appreciate you providing your feedback on that. Change that over. All right, so, and yes, we'll post the results of these polls, and we have this recorded, as Nick mentioned too. So we'll do a follow-up with the slides and the results. So do we need this? This probably is at the heart of a lot of IT CISOs and CIOs on, do we need this tool? We have a lot of tools. We're trying to move everything to single sign-on. I'm not going to geek out here, but for the network admins on the call, not everything is SAML integrated. Not everything can be connected to your Microsoft login or your Google login. I wish it was the case, but from a technology standpoint, that is a limitation. And let's just say it's 80% of the things can be tied to your corporate login, but 20 can't. This is really where you offset that risk and mitigate that exposure to your organization. And another common question we get is, isn't a vault risky if hacked? 100%. I know if I was a threat actor, I would be going after your crown jewels. This is a crown jewel. So we'll talk a little bit about if a password manager is hacked, what to do about it. And this is where I would love to crack open a beer and have some fun with this conversation, because it is a risk decision. It's the cliche, all your eggs in one basket, right? However, the risk associated with using Word documents, reusing passwords from personal to work and professional, that risk is astronomically worse than putting all your eggs in one basket. At least this basket has a moat and security guards and a castle. Like, if you really pay attention and protect this, it can be, like, again, astronomically more secure than the opposite. So if it does get hacked, I guess I'll just jump into it. The biggest thing, and I'm not going to name names because this happens to the best. It happens to Microsoft. If you're a big enough target, you're going to get hit. It's happened to RSA. I mean, this is definitely something to consider when you are implementing a password manager. Is if it got hacked today, what you would do is change your master password, right? So that they can't get into your encrypted database. The next step is, if you had notification that there's compromise, you would go into your said accounts and you would change your passwords. So you would change your bank password, you would change your ERP password, you change it. And oh, by the way, you could do all that so fast because, one, your password manager is showing you all the accounts that you have and it's generating the password. You can pivot and adjust incredibly fast if that was the case. The worst thing you could do would be to not change your master password and to not change those passwords if you're notified that a password manager was breached. But again, the speed in which you can pivot and change your passwords and make all of those old ones obsolete is probably an hour at the most if you're really dedicated and had some good communication. So yes, there is risk, but it is significantly less than the risk we're accepting by using Word documents and Excel sheets and emailing it and reusing passwords. Too many tools already team won't adopt. And I didn't talk to Michael before this presentation, but this is a thing. This is a thing. Like, it is a change management procedure. People are stuck in their old ways of how they're managing passwords. This is an additional tool. It's an additional click to getting into systems. However, once you do change the culture and get people to adopt a password manager, I have not yet in my life met somebody who was using a password manager who said they'd ever go back. Like, once you get onto the good side, you'll never go back to the dark side. I try never to use the word never, but it is a thing. And if you can break through that barrier, which we'll talk about those best practices, you'll make everyone a believer. But some people are just kind of used to their old ways, and it is probably, the the barrier to entry is just the culture thing of getting people to accept that, yes, there's going to be one more additional security tool. It is a learning curve, but it is minimum, and the return on that investment and that effort is significant. But you're going to run into that. So what a password manager does is it stores all your passwords securely in one place. If you kind of haven't picked up on that, it generates strong passwords, which has a huge return on your ability to stay safe. And it autofills logins across devices. So you could be on your phone or you could be in your web browser. It'll just pop up and say, hey, here's your username, here's your password, and you don't even have to think about it. It also enables secure sharing. So if you need to use a service account with your coworker, you can share that with them. You could share a credit card with them. You can share a whole bunch of different sensitive items without having to send it in a text message or an email. And then it does give you and your IT staff administrative control to help manage and implement it across the organization. I love this chart. It comes out every year. It shows you the number of characters on the left and numbers and lowercase, and it shows you potentially how long that would take to get hacked. And this just really shows you the importance of having 13 characters with your lowercase and your numbers. You're talking 100,000 years. So it's like, yeah, you can access my bank account in 100,000 years when I'm dead and gone. But that is significant to see this chart and just know that you need to get into the 15s, 17s. I know some websites won't let you do a 47 character. I've tried. They don't let you go past 20. But at 20, you're looking at a pretty significant time before that could be hacked by today's computing power. Again, some more real world benefits. You stop reusing weak passwords. It blocks credential stuffing attacks. And so that is when, again, I'm not to beat up on Nordic Track. I just got one for Cyber Monday, so it's fresh in mind. I was registering it this morning. But if you were to have a personal account breached, that password then can't be used to try to get into your personal because you're not reusing any passwords. It reduces the reset and lockout frustration. There was a time in which I couldn't remember my password, so my password was to reset my password. I would just get to the login and I just don't even know. Let's reset it. Send me the email. I'll wait a couple of minutes and then I'll renew it. It saves you time on that. It supports compliance. And it does help you with onboarding and offboarding employees. And this is kind of a unique one. A coworker and I were in a conversation with the other day that it bolsters OT and IoT systems. And what we mean by that is that a lot of these kind of analog, outdated programs like industrial control system, water system, they don't have the technical security controls that our typical enterprise laptops and servers have. And what I mean by that, they might not have MFA. You might not be able to MFA into your water system. So having a strong password is more important on that device than anything else. Because on maybe an enterprise system, you could have MFA enabled and maybe you have that 12-character password. But if someone did crack that 12-character password, they're going to get blocked by MFA. But in industrial control systems and OT and smartwatches, they don't have that MFA. So if they do crack that 12-character password, they're in. And that's where we feel that using password managers for these devices is even more paramount, just because that is your only defense. So if you can increase the complexity and strength of that password, the better off you are in managing the security of those systems, because sometimes it's the only defense you have. I think this is my last slide, and then I'll shut up here. So the best practices for a rollout is when you do decide to implement a password manager, you want to make sure that you have strong master passwords. And this is where you might want to write it down without maybe leaving the last two characters off. because they're going to need to know this password. And if you write it down and put it somewhere safe, maybe you have a vault in your company or somewhere secure, you want them to have access to it, because if they get locked out of their master password, they cannot get into everything else. It is significant. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can set up pins and all these other things, but they need to know their master password. And we write things down in the military all the time in cryptic fashion. We're not writing our passwords down letter by letter so that if someone ever came across it, we have some tools, actually a mouse pad, I don't know if you can see it, where you have kind of a grid, if you will. And if you know what your password is on that grid, then you can easily generate that password without anybody ever knowing. So there are ways in which you can write it down without writing it down. And I'm sure Michael might be cringing a little bit. I apologize. But from a best practice, we know this is a hangup. We've experienced it. When people forget their master password, it can be a rough morning. They're trying to get a hold of someone. Meanwhile, they need to get in the RP to make payroll. So that master password is something you want to have a plan on. How you go about it is really up to you, but they need to remember it needs to be strong. If we're talking 15 to 18 characters, that is hard to remember. But now we get into passphrases where you're not writing a word anymore. You're coming up with a phrase, and that is a lot easier for people to remember as well. Another thing that's kind of come up in that same category from password management is NIST and Microsoft have come out here recently talking about how frequently you should change your master password or your passwords in general. And for a lot of us, remember, we used to change it every quarter, 3-4 times a year, you're getting a new password. They're saying that's no longer the best practice, because if you change your password frequently, you're typically going to just use a similar password, right? Like you might throw a couple more dollar signs on there. You're really not moving it much. So having a strong password, 18 characters, everything in there, is more beneficial than changing it. And you can look up the sources on that from NIST and Microsoft as well. MFA, we highly recommend not just two-factor authentication, but multi-factor authentication. So, something you have, something and we can have, if you have a zero trust solution, or if they have to have MFA on their phone, now the phone's something they have, the code is something they get. But we highly recommend, because this is a crown jewel, to protect that master password with MFA. It'd kind of be dangerous to not do that. And then we talked about onboarding. So a best practice is to ensure you set up training for the stakeholders and your IT department, get everybody familiar and comfortable with the product, and then set up the company training. So you want to have champions across your organization who have already been in it and can help kind of champion your efforts. But the training and onboarding, I can't overemphasize how important that is, because if you can get it set up right, get everybody excited about it, get them on board, get them using it, then the rest is history. So that should probably be number one, but that master password is. And then we talked about be ready to roll passwords. If you did get a notification that a password manager was involved in any kind of breach, then boom, you just change your master password. You talk through with everybody, changing any critical passwords they had in there. And that is your damage control. So it's actually way easier than other breaches we've dealt with in our organization. Another thing you'll see with password managers, they typically come with home use. So you can take this home, you can give it to your spouse and your kids and use it at home. It's typically maybe a different user email account, so it's not associated with your work. But then you get to bring home this cyber hygiene to those that you love most. And yeah, my wife was probably the worst. Her passwords were terrible. And now that she's using a password manager, it's beneficial not only from protecting her, but it has allowed us to share very sensitive passwords. If I was to die today, she has the keys to the kingdom and can get that life insurance policy. So it is a very good contingency as well. We can talk a little bit about it later, but setting up passkeys and pins, again, that master password is a pain. If let's say it's 18 characters, if you want to get aggressive, maybe it's 22 as a company. If someone has to type that in every 3 hours, 4 hours, because you want it to be secure, that can make people not want to use it. Let's just be honest. And so if you set up a pin where they just have to remember their favorite 6 characters and they put that in, they'll love that. So we highly recommend using pins and passkeys to log into your master password. Now, the challenge there is 3 months from now, it might ask you for that master password and you forgot it because you're not using it. You pretty much don't remember any passwords. And that's where, yeah, you can do a reset, but that's going to take up some staff calories, your IT department. But this is where having it written down cryptic as can be can really help out. So then they go to that safe or they go wherever it is secure. They can look at that piece of paper and they can be reminded, oh yeah, that's where I was trying to go. Because yeah, people being locked out of their password manager is not something to be taken lightly. It is the keys for them to do the rest of their day. And pins are awesome. And then from a nerd standpoint, geofencing, this is essentially, if you have people in a geographic region, maybe they're not traveling, you can secure the password manager so that only people within a geographic area can log into that password manager. This is a best practice. It prevents an account being attacked from maybe across the country or across the world. So highly recommend, especially if someone's not traveling, to set up that geofence. So that is our experiences. We're all believers. We love password managers. It is definitely from an access control standpoint, increased our security posture here at Pearl Technology significantly in all of our customers. So with that, we appreciate our partner joining, and I'll hand it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Can you hear me okay?
I've got you.
Good. So Michael Crandell here, CEO of Bitwarden. Anthony, that was an insightful, thorough, and excellent summary of password managers and why we exist and how we try to help people. And, some of your stories about what practices we all default to, I do have to share an embarrassing story of my own. I go back to the early days of the internet, more than 25 years ago, when all these software as a service things were developing. And of course, I was creating passwords on my own. Being a tech guy, I thought it'd be real tricky and create a complex password. So I chose my dog's name followed by the year. Not super secure, right? And then as things evolved, sites would say, you need to capitalize one of the letters. So Anthony, I'll give you 3 guesses. Which letter do you think I capitalized?
Had to be the first one, Michael.
Yeah, it was the first letter, of course. And stay off mute for a second. And then, of course, they said you need a special character. So what do you think the special character was that I added and where?
I'm going exclamation at the end.
There you go. Yeah.
Hey, we didn't pre-talk either. I'm guilty of that one.
High-tech Michael doing complex passwords. So anyway, when I got introduced to password management in Bitwarden and had the chance to join 6 years ago, I kind of fell in love with the whole idea of it. As you say, there can be a bit of a kind of a speed bump as you're getting used to it. But one of the things I love about what we do at Bitwarden and password managers in general is it is a unique combination of security and convenience. Once you get used to using it, it actually saves you a lot of time because it's creating super complex and strong passwords quickly. More importantly, it autofills them. So you're into a website just like that very quickly. So anyway, returning to the presentation here, Bitwarden is a password manager, obviously distinguished by being open source. And just to clarify what that means to everybody, all the source code of how we manage passwords is out there on GitHub, where open source projects are hosted. We do that really to establish trust with customers, and anybody can look at it. I think we have well over 15,000 GitHub stars. We now are about to cross the 100,000 Reddit member community. So it spawns a very big community of people who are looking at what we do, including security researchers. And they try to take apart what we do. So we're kind of putting ourselves to the acid test of how we write the code that protects your sensitive information, your secrets, your crown jewels, as Anthony put it. And one thing to clarify, the way this is all architected, you mentioned, Anthony, there's an encrypted vault. The way it's architected, and that anybody who wants to can validate in our code, is that your secrets are encrypted locally on your machine, and they never go to Bitwarden unless they're encrypted. So we can't do anything with your vault because it's a bunch of encrypted gobbledygook. And further, once it arrives at Bitwarden, we re-encrypt the encrypted file that you sent us. And that's designed to take care of situations where maybe somebody might not use the strongest master password. And so things could be decrypted by hackers if they ever got at it. So anyway, we take a lot of steps to protect your sensitive information and make sure that even we can't get at it. We have more than 13 million users and more than 70,000 business organizations using the product, everywhere from one user, individuals, to actually a company that has 70,000 employees using the product. So we deal with a lot of scale here. Next slide. And to zoom in particular on one case study I wanted to talk about is a municipality. So it's a government agency that adopted Bitwarden, the city of Albany in New York. What they were looking for, they had some standard requirements around a way to securely store and share passwords for important municipal functions, public safety, public works, operations, etc. And then some special requirements. They were looking to self-host the solution. That's another differentiator for us, meaning that they didn't want to use a SaaS version of a password manager. They wanted to take the server portion and host that themselves. It was important from their security perspective that the place where the vaults were stored be under their control. That is an option that we allow. Most of our users, frankly, choose the cloud version, but it is also possible to self-host. And in the end, they were looking to protect themselves, as everyone does, from data breaches and cyber attacks. Next slide, please. So we work together closely, and we do this with any customer who wants it. We have a wealth of information online that you can go refer to if you're looking to self-educate and self-train and just DIY how you do everything. There's a lot of information. We even have an AI-powered search on our website. So if you go to bitwarden.com and click the search button, you will be able to ask any complex question you want to, and it'll search all of our information. But again, they were looking to have a source of truth, central source of truth, make it easy to gate access to applications based on, or operational things like water valves, based on individual users or groups of users. You can control both of those. Obviously, limiting access to only those who need it. In the security business, that's called least privileged access, meaning that any person only has access to really what they need and not more. That's an important security principle. It helped them with third-party audits. And this can apply both to just the regulatory environment around your institution or your organization, but also if you have cybersecurity, cyber insurance. You can often save money by implementing a password manager. They will actually allow discounts on your policy premiums if you do that, because it reduces their risk. And then it's kind of a fun fact, but they like to brag a little bit about the fact that they're self-hosting with their peers. And I just say more power to you. You see the quote there from Sean Park, the CIO for the city of Albany. Moving on to some other topics. Next slide here. I wanted to talk about an overarching function that we have added. Last spring, it went into early access, and just a couple of weeks ago, it went general availability. It's called Access Intelligence, and it's a system for IT admins to really get visibility into the password practices of the folks in their team and their organization and help people strengthen those. So it gives IT admins visibility into all of the applications that are in use by people using passwords. So it basically aggregates all of the applications. Let's take as an example Amazon.com. It shows you how many people have logins for Amazon.com and which of those might be at risk. When we say at risk, we mean that it's either somebody who might be using a weak password or a reused password, or worst of all, a password that might already appear on the dark web as having been breached in a security breach. We comb the dark web and look at data sources that show all of the passwords that have been breached. And then we can show that to the IT team so that they can identify where the weaknesses are. They can prioritize which applications are most sensitive to the company and go after improving the password hygiene for those first. That's the prioritization step. So as an example, if you have people with bank passwords or to critical operational systems, those are more important than Netflix. Hopefully they don't have Netflix in their work password manager, but as an example, somebody steals your password there, they're watching shows for free. So it's obviously less critical. Then alerting users and alerting them in a way that offers a link to a guided workflow to go fix that password. Fix it meaning change it to something strong and unique. And then back to the IT team, they can then monitor progress. So it's a great tool for the very ground level reality that the security of the company is only as good as the security of everyone who works at the company. And that's only as good as the strength and the hygiene of the passwords that they're using. Next slide, please. Also wanted to mention that sometimes people get confused because we are called a password manager and the category is called password management. But since quite a while ago, there are passwordless login techniques and there are passkeys. And passkeys in particular have come on the scene in the last couple of years with a roaring introduction, and you can use them on most of the major websites now as an alternative to a password. We highly recommend that. They are a form of encryption that is not as easy to steal as a password. In fact, it's unphishable to use a passkey, so strongly recommend those. And the important thing to remember is that we're in a world that has both. It's a hybrid world. So any of your users may be able to log in with a passkey or may not, and may have to log in with a password. All of us are going to be in this mixed hybrid world for years to come. And so it's important to have a tool that helps you with both. And most of the major password managers, certainly Bitwarden supports passkeys 100%, also supports biometrics. I got my phone here. When I use Bitwarden on my phone and I want to access a password for a website, I authenticate into Bitwarden with Face ID. So that's a combination of biometrics there. I don't have to type my master password. I can just go in with Face ID. We can also unlock with a PIN. And all of these are multi-factor authentication schemes. And Bitwarden also supports those if you want to store, for example, a time-based one-time passcode, those 6-digit codes that are often supplied by an authenticator app. Bitwarden has an authenticator app, and there's also one built into the password manager. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to say a word about Pearl Technology. You heard from Anthony already. Obviously, a smart guy. We love working with them because they absolutely know what they're talking about. Also interesting story I've heard from our staff that have attended some of their get-togethers, very family-focused organization, and recently did I think a kind of a get-together trade show kind of a thing where they also invited family members afterward. I think that fits perfectly with password management because for our enterprise edition, in addition to every seat for the organization, you get a free coupon for a family plan. And one of the reasons we do that is that password management and password hygiene is something you should practice throughout your life, not just at work and not at home, or just at home and not at work. The more you get into the habit of using it, as Anthony said, you'll be sold. And with that, Anthony, I think we have Q&A now, don't we?
Yep.
So I'll pass back to you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. And if I look at a couple questions here, the one that just happened was from John, and Jennifer, keep me straight if I miss anything. His question, Michael, is, I am sort of old school IT guy. Not to say you're old, Michael, but so are we. It seems counterintuitive to put my passwords in the cloud. Can you contrast using a password management cloud tool based with a locally stored spreadsheet locked down with an Azure classify and protect tool? And I'd say, yeah, you could, but I think what we're getting at today is more of an organizational implementation where for it to be scalable, as Michael mentioned earlier, you can have a locally hosted password manager. So if you don't want to use the cloud-based, even though it was secured with encrypted vaults upon encrypted, the double encrypt, you could, if you wanted to feel more safe about it, like I think it was the Albany CIO that said it's having their secure data in the right places, you could host it. So I think the Azure spreadsheet thing would be maybe an individual opportunity for you. But if you're wanting to use this across your enterprise and you really wanted to keep it out of the cloud, then yeah, you do the locally hosted. What do you have to say about that, Michael?
I'd agree. Keep in mind that in terms of safety, you mentioned the double encryption of people trying to get into the cloud. If you're talking about operational, what if you lose connection to the cloud? Bitwarden stores all that information locally for each user anyway. So what you would not be able to do is add or delete a password while the cloud connection was down. Otherwise, you could continue to use it. And I think where the spreadsheet might work for an individual, it really starts to get creaky for sharing credentials across people, which is quite a common use case that we come across, and also synchronizing across devices. You would want, I'm not familiar with the classify and protect tool, but you'd need access to that spreadsheet on your phone, on your iPad, on your laptop, on your work computer, if you're using multiple devices.
And Azure and AWS can go down. So if that went down and you lost access to all your passwords, that could be a rough day too. So good to have that locally hosted. And then the next question here comes from Michael. Says, could you say more about how the access intelligence discovers instances where passwords are used? For example, does it monitor web traffic? And I know you mentioned the dark web, but could you expand a little bit about how you monitor that?
Sure. There are two mechanisms. The first is that it basically gets the IT admin does not necessarily, unless they choose a setting to enable this, does not have access to the individual's passwords, but they do have access to the shared vault and the application name or URL that credential is stored under. So it's aggregating and looking at all the URLs for passwords that are stored by users across the organization. And that's how it knows which applications are in use. In addition to that, the second mechanism is a phishing blocker capability. And that does monitor web traffic based on a constantly updated list of malicious sites. So if one of your users should accidentally click on a link that is a link to a malicious site, they get phished, it does happen, then the browser extension that's installed there with Bitwarden will be watching for that and will put up a warning. so that they hopefully will go, ooh, oops, and catch themselves before they end up at the malicious site.
Interesting. That's the first I'd heard of that, but that is a timely notification because I mean, a lot of people, it's easy to spoof a website. So if you're logging into the wrong one, it's going to tell you. How does it know? How does it know based on the URL? Is it just saying that domain or that website's compromised, or is it able to detect it's maybe a spoofed or faked page?
It's based on a list that we keep of malicious
Okay.
sites that are known and discovered all the time.
Okay.
So it's URL based URL matching.
Awesome. I don't know, Jennifer or anyone else, am I missing any other questions? We will share the poll results.
Yep, I think that's all the questions.
All right. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody making the time. Really appreciate you joining us, Michael, and everyone from the Bitwarden team. It's a great conversation and kind of look forward to learning more about your new rollout too. So I got some research to do myself, but it sounds like some great stuff.
Thanks for having us and have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
All right.
Take care. Goodbye.